So I'm going to start this video by mounting all the platforms that will be part of this cat tree, and in order to do that I'm using a laser level that will give me a line, and I could spin the tree and mark that line around the entire circumference so I get a flat line. Now I know a lot of people don't have a laser level. If you don't, before I got one, the way that I would do that would be just with a mark and then a regular level transferring it around the whole piece. That works. It's just much easier to do it with the laser level. Once I had that line, you could see I could cut it off at the handsaw flat. For these platforms, I actually happen to have some scrap 3/8 inch cheaper grade of ply that I had left over from another piece. So I'm just going to laminate two pieces of that together. That will give me 3/4. I wouldn't use just regular 3/8. It's a little flimsy. And since this will be glued and screwed into place, all I'm doing is using some glue to put it between the two pieces, sandwich them together, and then just put some black brads in there while the glue dries, and that's more than enough to keep this sort of piece together for what I'm using it for. I wanted all these platforms to touch the central part of the tower in one way or another, just to make everything a little sturdier. So I was just using a flexible hose I had hanging around the shop. Could transfer that angle on the branch to the piece, kind of go back and forth, cut it with a jigsaw, and get it lined up perfectly. You'll notice throughout this video that the cat tree is rocking. That's just because I don't have it sitting on my ground. I have it sitting on a smaller piece of plywood so I don't mar up the bottom. So that is why it's rocking. When it sits on a flat surface without that bottom, it's really sturdy. So once I had it marked and meeting the tree how I wanted it to, I just turned all these pieces are going to be turned into ovals. Roughly, all the ones except for the one at the top is about 12 inches wide by 16 inches long. And then I'm just going to use a weight on the back of this to attach this to the tree. And then I can, now that it's attached there, I could drill a hole through the top of this platform into that branch below it, and then put a dowel in there. If you've been watching this, the first series, you'll see how I attach the branches. At this point, this has been sitting in my shop for a couple months. I already started to get some hairline gaps between the original tree branch and the branches I added, just because this has shrunk since the height of humidity in the summertime. That's natural. There's nothing you could do to avoid that. Luckily, with all the stuff on it, you really don't notice those pieces, but I wanted to point that out for people that might notice it. You could put a dowel in there, let that dry, and that is the first platform. For the next one, I mounted all of these differently. I kind of wanted to do this a little organically. I didn't really have a plan as I was going, and I just worked my way up the tower, kind of deciding what would look best. And for the next one, because it was the way the branch was teed at the top, I didn't want to cut that off. I really liked that detail, so what I decided to do was mount this second platform in between two. Same process. I used the laser level to get a first line. I calculated the thickness of my plywood and matched another line. This worked really well because I'm going between two branches, so it's really important that these lines are perfectly parallel to each other, and you'll see they turned out pretty good. I could score a mark on the bottom, score a mark on the top, and then remove this material with a chisel, so then that plywood piece can slide right in between these two branches. And then this is nice because this will really solidify up this part that is sticking out over here. You can see I'm just removing some of that material with a chisel and making a groove in this branch. Obviously you don't want to take away too much so that top pops off, but that's basically what it is. Then I used a scrap piece of that plywood to figure out how this will fit in there. My alignment wasn't perfect, so I had to put a little bit of an angle in this one piece so it slid in. That's why I'm using scrap. Once I got it to fit with this scrap piece, I could transfer that onto the piece I'm going to put in there. That's basically that angle. I think it was something about 9 degrees, so I could cut that angle in the front there. And then once again, I marked center so that it's centered between the two tree branches, rounded off the edges. I didn't want any square edges. There's a little gap in the back there because, like I said, my two marks were parallel to each other, but they weren't facing each other as perfectly as I wanted them to. So I did that, rounded off the edges as you saw in an earlier clip with the angle grinder. That's probably not necessary because you're going to be, well, at least I covered these with fur, but I didn't want to have to worry about any snags or splinters on those edges, so I rounded them off. And then you can see I slid it into place with some glue. So for the next branch, I did it the exact same way as the bottom branch. I just put a bigger arc where it meets the tree. So I'm not going to film doing that. It was the same process, using the laser level to flatten off that branch, using a flexible hose to get that arch there. And what I haven't mentioned so far, but is really important, all these I'm checking to make sure they're level in all dimensions. Otherwise, not only will it not look nice, but if it's severely off level, it's going to be uncomfortable for the cat to sit on. So I put a clamp on the tree, and I could just attach that one the same way with some screws and a dowel into the branch. For the one up top, I'm basically using a friction fit wedge in order to get this to fit. It's going to be similar to the second platform where I'm going to have it bridging between the two branches. This one had a knot up top, same thing. I didn't want to cut it off, remove the character of the piece of wood, so I just drilled a hole that was a little bit bigger than that knot so it could slide over, and you'll see when I wedge this into place it won't move. And then I just want it to sit right on that knot that's sitting out on the other branch, so I don't have to cover up that top part, which I really like. So I just put it in place, marked where it was going to fit, roughly cut that. You could see when it's wedged, it doesn't move. And then I could screw this one into place as well. Just had it clamped and screw it into place so it's connected. And then once these are screwed in place, they really don't move at all. Once that was dry, I'm going to remove all these screws and replace them with dowels. These are just drywall screws I'm using to put stuff in place. So they're not super structural, and I didn't want to have to worry about torquing, making them snap off, which is probably extreme, but I didn't want to worry about it. So once I had everything in place, I slowly removed those screws, put dowels in place. To start finishing off the bottom, I just got some, I believe it's pronounced sisal, S-I-S-A-L rope off of Amazon. This is specifically for cats. You can obviously use it for other purposes, but that is what is recommended to use for these cat trees. And I just put it around the entire bottom of the piece. You could see I'm hot gluing as I go. Obviously, cats have nails. They're going to be scratching on this stuff. I didn't want to have to worry about it coming apart. So this was a long process, but I did go around the whole piece and hot glue that on the bottom. For the top here, this is a cat scratching mat, and I just wanted to cover the top of this with that. It has Velcro on the bottom, which was nice, but I didn't really think about how I wanted to finish off the base before I started this project, so the size of my base just didn't really fit any of the cat scratching carpets out there. It was a little too big for the ones that were available, so you could see I'm cutting it to fit, and all I'm using is a seam ripper to remove the strips of Velcro off the bottom. I'm going to put them on the piece that I cut, and then I'll attach it that way. Same process to cover up this branch in the middle. I'm going to cut, just mark as I go. 3 or 4 times I'll do this. Mark, cut a little bit, make sure it fits, and then sneak up on it so it has a nice fit. And then once it's on there, I'm going to go through and hot glue these edges because it's woven, and because I cut it, they were starting to come apart. So I just put a little hot glue on the edges so that I don't have to worry about those pieces coming apart. And then I could reattach the Velcro that is on the bottom. So this way, this mat will be able to come off, and like I said, you could have access to those sandbags, and mostly that is going to be for moving it, which is funny because I actually helped my cousin move this into her car because she came to pick it up, and we didn't remove the sandbags because it's not a bad carry for 2 people. And then I could attach the Velcro. This came with the mats. If I try and remember, I'll put a link in the description, but I basically just found one of the more cost-effective options on Amazon. There's tons of options on there for these mats, and that is what I chose. So then that will also cover that rounded part on the plywood, the seam on the plywood, but I'm creating another seam with that cat mat anyway. So then to finish off the edges, I had a scrap 2x4 laying around. I'm basically going to rip it into 1.5. Rip it into 1.5 sections, and since a 2x4 is 1.5, they'll be square. I'm going to remove a little notch out of the middle and basically make some custom L-shaped molding that will sit on top of this entire frame. Screws will go into it through the plywood into the base, so it's permanently attached, but it can come off like I keep saying, so you can remove those sandbags. This is what that material looks like with that notch cut out on the inside. I just made 2 strips of it, put miters on the corners, and just put screws on the top. So I'm just matching up the miters, and then I'm going to use a scrap piece of woods from a cutoff. I could align it on that piece, use it to mark where my next miter has to go, and just work my way around that outside frame. So if your base isn't perfect, these miters aren't really going to match up. Mine turned out okay, but it's not anything I would severely stress about. And that is what that looks like. Now, I don't do a lot of exposed hardware on this channel. I prefer joinery, but if I am going to do it, I take the time to center it and then make it symmetrical. It just makes exposed hardware look nicer when it's aligned, personally, I think when it's aligned that way instead of kind of scattered around the top. So then my corners, some of my corners weren't matching as nice as I wanted to, so I decided to epoxy this whole thing in place, similar to a picture frame. Originally, I was just going to have them as separate pieces, and that is because I figured out you could remove this entire frame by kind of tilting it up and over the whole cat tree, which I don't think you'll have to do, but it's also going to make it a little sturdier. I'm impatient, so I used 5-minute epoxy for this so I could keep working. But just for the purpose of this video, you can see I could nest it on one of the platforms, remove the top parts and the sandbags, put it back in place, and then it gives it a nice finished look. To finish out the corners, I took that same L molding, cut it down a little bit, and then taped it to the corners. I'm not really nervous about that robe coming off because of all the hot glue, but just in case, if it starts to fray, those corners will keep everything from coming off too much. And then, like I said, I replaced all of those screws that I have in here with dowels. This is thoroughly dry at that point, so I did that. In order to cover this top, instead of buying fur from Joann's or a place like that where it can be really expensive, I found a very inexpensive carpet that actually has like a nice foam pad in it. I think this was just like $30. It was enough to do the whole thing with a little bit extra, and it's just a more cost-effective way to do it. I had it set in my head that I wanted these also to be Velcroed on in place. I don't own a cat, but anyone I know that's ever owned a cat, I know they like to throw up all over stuff. So I wanted this to be able to be detached and washable. This made this process a little more time consuming. If that is not a concern, a stapler will make this process 10 times faster. You can see all I'm doing is I cut a piece big enough to fit on there, but I also wanted to wrap completely around the bottom so you didn't see the plywood on the bottom. And all I'm doing is making some relief cuts as I go so that it can wrap tightly around the piece. Putting little pieces of Velcro, I'm reinforcing it with hot glue because I don't trust the adhesive on this Velcro on there, and then attaching it to the bottom. So like I said, as you can see, as it fits, wherever it's going to pooch out, essentially, I'm cutting it, and then it can wrap onto the bottom, and that is what it looks like on the bottom, so everything's nice and covered, and this is the top as well. If you are going to do this, and you're using a similar product to mine, you could see that this carpet gets everywhere. It's complete. At one point I actually had to put a mask on because I was inhaling so much of this cut carpet, but at the end of the day I was happy with how it worked. I'm going to coat this wood with a conditioner. I happen to have this butcher block conditioner, which I'm going to use. The reason I'm using this is it's food grade safe, so if the cat decides to chew on this, they won't get sick. If you don't have butcher block conditioner or you don't want to use butcher block conditioner, just make sure whatever you're putting on there is safe for consumption, essentially, because you get really sick with some of these finishes. I always recommend putting a finish on wood. It protects it, it makes it look a little nicer, make it last longer. So then I bought some thicker rope to finish this off. This came just from Lowe's, finishing off the base so that there's a spot to claw at the bottom. Same process, just using hot glue to wrap it all the way around. I actually wrapped the bottom branch to kind of hide that separation I was telling you about. It was only really bad on that one bottom branch. I started to wrap the other branches as well, just where they met the center part, but I didn't like the way it looked, so I stopped, and this is basically it. Like I said, my cousin came and picked it up already, but she has to find someone to help her to move it into the house. But I told her, I don't think she has a ton of tools, but I told her just take out those couple screws, the sandbags will come out. You could probably carry it herself, but this is what it looks like. I'm pretty happy with the finish.